You know, the NPR is sitting on like a massive trust fund that they have never even touched. And NPR also has people that give it money. Yes, they do all their drives. You know, you get the deluxe signed edition of Cats, signed by Andrew Lloyd Webber, or one of the many people who played a cat over the course of the decades that somehow that play has survived and kept coming back and keeps coming back and turned into an awful movie that, I mean, I never saw it, but just the previews alone were enough to make me nauseous. But my point is that good riddance and goodbye. And this idea that people are going to die if there's not NPR and PBS, that these rubes, I love how for all these years the left has like mocked people in rural America, looked down on them as the unwashed masses in flyover country. Now suddenly they're all worried about them, that they're going to die if they don't have their NPR and their PBS. Isn't that something? Like the coastal elites who up until 5 minutes ago mocked people who lived in rural America and drive their pickup trucks and listen to talk radio and everything else. Now they're suddenly like, oh my gosh, these poor people, they're going to die. How are they going to survive without their NPR and their PBS? Well, look at the electoral map. I think rural America is going to be just fine because they didn't vote to keep NPR and PBS. It wasn't like they were electing a guy who was a big fan of NPR or PBS, or a guy who NPR or PBS said nice things about. And yet when you look at that electoral map, that whole rural America that apparently is going to die now, they all voted red. They all voted Republican. They all voted for Donald Trump. So it's pretty funny to me that they go out there and they say all these things, isn't it? It's pretty, I find it to be quite charming. I really do. But on that vein of this, the CEO of PBS said she can't make any sense of the argument that they are somehow biased in any way on public broadcasting. PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, cut number 6.
I ask them for examples. People often struggle to come up with examples of what really they're talking about. So we're always interested, obviously, in making sure that we're serving a multiplicity of viewpoints. You know, Bill Buckley made his home on public broadcasting with a series called Firing Line, which continues today with Margaret Hoover. We are interested in having different perspectives that we bring forward. But when I look at the range of our programmings on public broadcasting, I can't make any sense of an argument that we are somehow biased in any way.
Margaret Hoover? That's your example? Margaret Hoover, who was a very nice person, not exactly MAGA. I'm not saying you need a MAGA person on there, but she's about as anti-Trump as you get. So if that's your gold standard to justify how you're unbiased. But here's Yamiche Almaguer. This is a flashback to 2020. Then PBS White House correspondent, Yamiche Alcindor, that's the proper way to say her name. When President Trump gave a speech at Mount Rushmore, you remember that in 2020? Gave a speech at Mount Rushmore. This is how she described it. The White House correspondent for PBS, cut number 7.
I think what we're seeing is a president who's determined to fly in the face of the experts and his own health officials, environmental experts, as well as people who are saying that there's really a myth of America, that this idea that America treated people well, that they treated men and women equally, that we founded this country just by our own wit, that is actually a lie, and that in fact what we're seeing is a celebration of America's independence on land that was stolen from Native Americans, and it's being seen and overlooked by 2 presidents, their figures rather, that owned slaves, and a 3rd president in Roosevelt who talked about going westward and who oversaw the desecration of native lands. That's why you saw so many people in this country, especially people of color, look really, really disturbed when the president and then candidate Trump started saying, "Make America Great Again." He's really fitting in this history that is in some ways Republican history about the idea that they're really looking at white resentment and giving people who are worried about the future of America, but who are also angry at the idea of America browning, and giving them a place to say, you know what, you are the victim. This country owes you more, instead of looking toward the future and saying, actually, let's have an America where we're not believing in this myth. Let's have an America where people do understand the history of America. President Trump is saying, I want to be on the side of the myth of America.
I think that's completely objective and unbiased. How about you? I mean, that is textbook unbiased objectivity, if you ask me. I mean, I didn't hear anything in there that was slanted. Did you? I mean, not one single thing. So that was the White House correspondent. By the way, in case you're new to the show, we have new people joining the show every day. That's me being sarcastic. I have a tendency to do that sometimes. And people who've been with me since day one, and you're always welcome to join. And even people that pretend to leave and don't, they still stick around. But anyway, I tend to use sarcasm sometimes to prove a point. That's an example of that. I'm only saying that because if you're new to the show, you might be like, what, did you just hear the same clip I just heard? This woman hates America and thinks it's a racist place and that Trump's a racist. And yes, and that was their White House correspondent. Okay, not an opinion person on PBS. That was the White House correspondent. But they're not biased, all right? Totally not biased. In 2020, NPR called the Declaration of Independence a document with flaws and deeply ingrained hypocrisies. National Public Radio. And of course, you'll never forget the guy who was the whistleblower for NPR, who said that everybody there is a Democrat. NPR apologized for using the term illegal immigrants to describe illegal immigrants, amongst the many things. I'm so happy that they're getting rid of this. I really am. According to our friends over at Newsbusters, Media Research Center, PBS started using the term far right 27 times more frequently than they use the term far left. And 90% of PBS news coverage on gender ideology echoed leftist views. PBS has had full panel discussions on white privilege, among many other things. And of course, the only people who are really going to miss this are not the rural Americans driving around in their F-150 pickup trucks, because they're not listening to NPR and they're not watching PBS. Rural America voted for Trump, and Trump is gutting these people, gutting the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, gutting NPR, and rural America is fine with it. Rural America wants this to happen. And I'm not going to listen to these people in D.C. and New York and California pretend like they care about flyover country. All them redneck rubes with their tobacco. Here's Caroline Levitt talking about the cuts to PBS and NPR. Cut 32.
Thank you, Caroline.
No, I called on Charlie, but...
Oh, 32? Got that?
NPR, she's claiming that the cuts to their network will, quote, be a real risk to public safety of the country. Congresswoman Murkowski has argued that public broadcasting stations save lives. Could you respond to these concerns?
The NPR CEO said cutting NPR will be a risk to public safety. I am not sure how NPR helps the public safety of our country, but I do know that NPR, unfortunately, has become really just a propaganda voice for the left. Just a few examples for you. In 2020, NPR refused to cover the Hunter Biden laptop scandal in the run-up to the election. They said their assertions don't amount to much, writing they did not want to waste the listeners' and readers' time on stories that are just pure distractions. That does not sound like an unbiased opinion. That sounds like a partisan opinion to me. And this is a taxpayer-funded organization. In 2018, that same CEO that you're talking about called the president in the Oval Office, who nearly 80 million Americans elected, she called him racist, shared a photo of herself wearing a Biden for president campaign hat, serves on the board of a Soros-funded activist group. In 2020, PBS's White House correspondent at the time characterized President Trump's speech then at Mount Rushmore as a love letter to white resentment, promoting the myth of America. In 2017, PBS devoted an entire panel talking about what it means to be woke and white privilege. In 2023, PBS's Washington Week roundtable covered up Joe Biden's clear mental divide. That's actually quite the clip. I would encourage all of you to look at it. These are not honest news organizations. These are partisan, left-wing outlets that are funded by the taxpayers. And this administration does not believe it's a good use of the taxpayers' time and money.
How did we get here, though? I mean, right? I mean, like, how did we end up with state-funded, government-backed media in the first place? Well, there's a piece today in the Wall Street Journal by James Freeman who breaks it down. And it's really interesting how this came to be, because it will get part of its support from the government, but it will be carefully guarded from government or from party control. It will be free and it will be independent and it will belong to all the people. But how can the government, forbidden to establish a church or to censor speech, presume to establish a taxpayer-supported broadcasting system? The system, unsurprisingly, soon became the voice of the political establishment, offering a consistent narrative in favor of more government action, government programs, and government solutions. That was something that Walter Downey recently said at the Daily Economy. He explored the origins of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and observed the following. The architects of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting knew that they must evade the First Amendment. Thus, Congress structured and funded them as a, quote, private, nonprofit corporation wholly independent of the federal government. It forbade any department, agency, officer, or employee of the United States to exercise any direction, supervision, or control over educational television or radio broadcasting. Wholly independent except for funding. Government cannot spend tax dollars decade after decade and disclaim responsibility for the quality of what they buy. Or rather, it can disclaim responsibility only as long as criticism remains muted. And executives of public television and radio know that. They know the government still holds the purse strings and that their future depends upon keeping the politicians happy. So they create this Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They create this National Public Radio, and they create these things and they say, oh, no. When they did this in 1967, at a time of heightened leftism with a Democrat president in the White House, Lyndon Johnson, they thought, well, listen, we're gonna have this objective state-run media, and it's going to be absolutely 100% completely unbiased. Totally. But the end result now, all these years later, 50, 60 years later, is that they're not unbiased and they're also unnecessary. So if in this day and age, we can find ways for these other outlets to exist, why can't they? Why can't they find a way to exist? I mean that, really, with all of the money that's out there in this day and age, why can't they cough up some cash to keep NPR and PBS going? Why not? Why can't all those Soros-funded boards that Caroline Leavitt meant, why don't they just give money to NPR? Give money to PBS. If it's profitable, somebody will buy it. If it's profitable, one of these woke lefty billionaires out there, like that tubby J.B. Pritzker, why doesn't he buy it? I mean, the guy is the richest politician in America, worth billions of dollars. Let him buy NPR. Let him fund NPR. Let him fund PBS. Or ask all the woke people that listen to those entities, cough up some cash. When they say people are going to die, what they mean by that is, in an emergency, people will go to the radio and then they won't have their NPR to be able to give them the emergency direction that they need to evade I don't know what. And they'll turn on TV and there'll be no PBS to tell them what to do. Does anybody really believe that? First of all, one of the biggest reasons why people are fighting to keep the AM radio in cars, conservatives, is that very reason. And look, I'm not about telling car makers what to do, but I happen to broadcast on an AM radio station. You may not listen on AM radio. You probably listen on an app at this point, whether it's the iHeartRadio app or the Odyssey app, or you stream it on YouTube or whatever, you listen to the podcast, whatever. But I mean, maybe you still listen to old school radio. I don't know. But the point is that I feel as if it's incumbent upon me that I have an emergency radio for my home. So I got one of those little emergency radios that's battery powered, and I have it in the case of an emergency. I have flashlights. I have matches. I have a thing to make water clean. You know, those little pills you used to bring camping that you could dilute to make your water be able to drink. I have those things. It's incumbent upon me to do that. But if I tune to an AM radio station and I can't find the public message that's out there on my little home radio, okay, I go to the FM band, I'll try it. I just have a hard time believing that if the S really hits the fan, they're not going to interrupt, say, WFAN in New York or the Whip right here in Philadelphia and jump in on the programming to say, here's the deal. The aliens have landed. The nukes have gone off. We interrupt this Phillies game right now to tell you to go and cover your behind because I'm like, it just, my practical brain tells me that if AM radio tomorrow ceased to exist, if it wasn't in the car, if it wasn't on my little emergency home radio, somehow we would still find a way to get the emergency instructions if the S really hits the fan. Like they would cut into programming. You know what I mean? That even if you didn't have cable, when whatever you're watching on with your antenna, because you know the antenna gets that, I think it's MeTV. I think it's channel 2, if I'm not mistaken, and they run all those old shows. Like I think they would cut in on that too. Right? With a special address on how what you need to do right now because the fungus has taken over and it's now turning people into fungi people or fungus people, fungi people, whatever. And this is what you need to do. Like, I just have a hard time believing that whatever contract we've signed with the Phillies, that if the S goes down in the middle of a Phillies game and it's the 5th inning, that 94 WIP wouldn't cut in to give everybody everybody listening the emergency instructions on what they need to do to save themselves if, God forbid, AM radio went away. You know what I mean? Like, I know what I'm doing if AM radio goes away. I'm starting my podcast, and you'll listen to it because you like me, and I like you. You'll find a way. You'll find me. Somehow you'll find me. If tomorrow AM radio goes away, if they flip this station to Latin polka music, I know you'll find me. I don't lose sleep over it. I did at one point, because we didn't have the technology we have today. I mean, truthfully, maybe 5 years ago, I might have worried about this. When people started telling me that Volvo, which, you know, they were a sponsor for a while, and people would say, well, there's no AM radio in the car. And I'd say, all right, well, you can listen on the app, and, you know, there's a learning curve with that, and not everybody's technologically savvy, and now they get the smart speakers, and they just say to play this or play that. If tomorrow I get a phone call from Greg Stocker going, I got bad news, you're fired. And I would go, okay, that's fine. And then on Monday, I'll roll out the podcast. You'll figure out a way to listen to it. You'll find a way. If the station's gone tomorrow, if Soros shuts us down, whatever it is, I'm prepared for it. But the same thing goes for an emergency. As an AM broadcaster, I can tell you that I'm pretty confident that if the AM ban goes away, this is why I didn't rush to support and I appreciated it. When Ted Cruz and the others were out there advocating for the AM radio to stay in the car, I was not one of those people that was like, yeah, let's have the government tell car makers to keep AM radio for public safety. I didn't endorse that plan. I didn't like it, even though I make my money broadcasting on AM radio. But I'm also not going to be a hypocrite when it concerns me and my livelihood. So if I don't want the government telling car makers what to do, and I said at the time, look, they tell car makers what to do all the time. It's why they have those annoying dings, ding, 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 till you buckle your friggin' seatbelt. You know, they got to have this and that. But I don't like it. And so I understand why they have or how they have the authority to do so. But I also am a realist. If the AM radio band goes away, then the FM band will be where people go to get their news and get their information in an event of a crisis. And if there's no NPR and there's no PBS, whatever station that is privately owned and run, the government is going to probably politely ask them, do you mind cutting into this Eagles game so we can tell everybody that there's a nuclear missile incoming? or that there's a flood coming or that whatever's coming? And if they say no, the government's probably going to say, well, we're doing it anyway because we have the FCC and we control your license and we're doing it anyway. And I'm sure that under the FCC Act of 1930 or whatever it is when Roosevelt signed it, I'm sure the government already has that authority now to take over any public broadcast they want at any time for life-saving emergency reasons. The president still has the ability to ask the networks for time and to give an address to the nation. My point is, this fear-mongering is absolute freaking nonsense. There is no reason for the government to fund radio or television in this day and age, and using public safety as the guise is ludicrous. There's no reason for the government to mandate AM radio in cars using public safety as the impetus. That's also nonsense. It's ridiculous. If you didn't have a radio in your car, and many car makers now are not putting radios in anymore. Do I worry about that? No, I don't worry about that at all. Not for a second, because you'll find a way to listen to me. You're a smart person. You'll figure it out. Same thing in an emergency. You'll find a way. If China hacks all the radio and TV towers tomorrow and we can't get the information, you'll find a way. You'll figure it out. You're smart. You think ahead of these things. The rubes in rural America can do it too. They can put down the hayseed and the tobacco, and they can stop milking the cows for fun and figure out their own emergency safety plan too. And we don't need the elites in New York and D.C. looking down on the people in rural America once again like they're too friggin' stupid to figure out how to deal with an emergency if they don't have their NPR and their PBS. Stop with your fake outrage. Stop with the mockery. Stop with the grandstanding. But if we want to have grandstanding on the issue, who do we turn to? Count Grandstangela, Spartacus Booker, and the Tears of Rage Band, which you can hear, by the way, on FM radio, I believe on Saturday nights on HDM or HD Radio Channel 3, I believe. I'm not quite sure. I may have to double check that when Cory Booker's Tears of Rage Band is performing. But here's him throwing a tantrum. Actually, this is over a judge. This is a different outrage. But he threw outrage over NPR and PBS as well. Spare me the fake outrage. You don't care about the people in rural America. Stop it. And nobody in rural America cares about PBS and NPR. Enough. Here's Chuck Schumer whining and warning that all those dumb rubes in rural America are going to die. Take a listen.
And these cuts to local stations couldn't happen at a worse time, with floods and natural disasters front of mind. When a flood happens, when a tornado touches down, when a hurricane makes landfall, people need immediate, up-to-date alerts to stay safe. And sometimes, all too often, public broadcasting is the only way for people to hear what's going on. It's a matter of life and death. So why is Donald Trump so hell-bent on taking away funding from local stations that can literally save lives? And these cuts to local stations couldn't happen.
Let me ask you a question,
Chuck.
Chuck. Question for you. Why didn't they save lives in Texas? And we're a local station. I mean, technically speaking, 1210 WPHT is a local station. And are you going to jump in and save the day if we don't have money to keep the lights on so that we can keep everybody safe? Chuck, I'm curious. I really am curious. There are hundreds of conservative radio stations around the country, hundreds of them. I think 600. I think Sean Hannity's on 650 stations or something like that around the country. So many of them are AM stations. Some are simulcast on FM, but the bulk of them are AM radio stations. So my question is to Chuck Schumer, are you worried about all those local stations? Would you jump in with government funding to save them if those stations could not make it? Because many of them can't. You know, a lot of these small local radio stations are closing up shop, or they're flipping formats, or they're just going dark. They're just turning off their transmitter. Or they're just putting on syndication. There's no local hosts anymore, whatever it is. I'm just curious, based on that logic, if you're going to jump in and pass a funding bill to help local AM radio stations around the country survive. Will you mandate that AM radio stations stay in cars? Of course not. The answer is no. You wouldn't do any of those things. Any of those things. But theoretically, I could get interrupted right now with what do they call those things? They call them the emergency EAS. Yes. and EAS could interrupt me right now and tell that there's a tornado warning in Wilmington, right? Absolutely. So theoretically speaking, my show saves lives. This radio show is a lifesaver, and without it, people could die. So if Talk Radio 1210 WPHT couldn't make it, which we can, obviously, we make a ton of cash thanks to you supporting our great sponsors. But let's say hypothetically we couldn't. Well, Chuck Schumer jump in and save the day with a big government funding package for all these conservative radio stations around the country that broadcast all those hate-filled right-wing lunatics like myself, in his eyes. I'm asking.